Richer than God, dumber than a brick, more stereotypically German than Oktoberfest, and sporting an ungodly number of ungodly giant mechs. And with those basic criteria explained, a meme was born. The Lyran scout lance of Atlas assault mechs appearing suddenly and without warning. An amused Guten Tag sounds off as death follows, and the mech warriors drink to the results. Everyone even tangentially familiar with BattleTech will know about today's topic, at least in passing. And before we actually get into the Lyran Commonwealth, I swear to God, man, this is the meme faction in all of BattleTech. Not the Capellans or the Free Worlds League, though one might think it. Everyone laughs at the Capellans because they're the sick man of the setting and backstabby little pricks. The Free Worlds League has like one thing going for it because they're side characters, and that's lol Civil War. But the Lyrans are actually just an entire Jenga tower of insanity from top to bottom that's precariously balancing on the singular piece at the bottom. From their currency being backed by germanium instead of gold or silver or anything else, regardless of the justification for it, we all know that the writers picked it for the meme, then backfilled a sensible explanation, to their military strategy literally being, just keep feeding men to the wood chipper Hans, it will clog eventually, I swear. You know, an entire World War I's worth of tactical brilliance there, to the fact that the Lyrans are the closest any faction in the setting gets to the hell that was the Holy Roman Tollbooth Empire. This entire faction is just a joke at the surface level, in the best way possible. But I don't think people realize how deep it actually goes, since there's a very interesting crust, skin, exterior, rind, whatever, I guess, of more simple jokes that you'll see hammered into the ground. Herder Scout Lance, Herder Social General, Herder Catherine McBackstabby Steiner Davion. And in the early videos, I was guilty of similarly painting the Lyrians with a very, very broad brush. But hopefully, today, we can not only present a more clear and coherent view of the Lyran Commonwealth, but also educate the BattleTech community a bit on how truly insane the Lyrians are under the hood. Can you feel it? The collective rush of thousands of hands running to type out corrections and gotchas in the comments? Can you feel the people correcting me on my mispronunciation of Lyran as Lyrian? Also, I'm doing a bit of a throwback moment here. It's not going to continue for the whole video, don't worry, but if you've written a comment correcting my pronunciation of Lyrian to Lyran, congrats. I played you like a fiddle. I know how it's pronounced. In some of my first videos, though, I didn't because I'm stupid and my brain added an extra phantom Y in there. Why add a Y? Because Lyran grates on my brain like steel wool for some reason. So to all the people in the comments that fell for the random, pointless, stupid gotcha right at the beginning, congratulations, they have now self-identified as okay to bully. Have fun, my community. I set you free. Before we actually get into the video proper, introductions. Generic greetings, I'm Sci, and this is Science Insanity, and the entire purpose of this wonderful channel of mine is to bring my love of science fiction to all of you, hopefully being entertaining while I do. And normally I'd introduce my co-host here, but Steve is sick IRL, and our schedules haven't lined up for like a month and a half, so I'm on my own. Probably people should expect a few more Sci solo shows as well before he gets back, so for all the people wondering where Steve, that's where Steve is. On to the video though. And instead of their history first, like I normally do with these kinds of things, I want to start with their culture because I think it's actually really interesting, and that's mostly because it's kind of back-asswards. Like all the other factions in the setting, the Lyrans are a hodgepodge of a bunch of different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. Unlike the others, though, which predominantly hail from one region and build their core culture around it, you know, the Draconis Combine is mostly East Asian stereotypes and turbo-weebery. The Lyrans, in comparison, are an absolute mess, like a true mixing pot hodgepodge of everything. America, North and South, Africa, Australia, all over Europe, plenty of Central Asia, and I'm pretty sure some random cultural influence from the middle of nowhere or another planet. It's a little bit of everything plus the kitchen sink. And you'd think, got it. Many different cultures, Holy Roman Empire joke at the beginning, the Lyrans must have an ungodly amount of civil and cultural strife, especially with the German flavor of things. But no, it's actually the exact opposite. Even more than the Free Worlds League's open acceptance or the Fed Sun's noble bright ghettos, the Lyrans are arguably the most accepting and welcoming of any of the factions in the setting, full stop. Which again, the German faction, quote unquote. And you know what? Let's just get rid of that right at the beginning. They are not German. That is generally an incorrect characterization. For most of the Lyran Commonwealth's history, the language, the culture, the government style was whatever the local polities and planets that made it up wanted it to be. German, the language, and more Prussian-style government influence and bureaucracy only came about later, pushed as a way to unify a single language and governing style at the highest levels more than any real trickle-down of authentic culture. The Draconis Combine forces the actual weebery on its entire nation, like I said before. You've dishonored the straw man we've constructed of samurai culture, you must commit headbutting contest with a landmine as penance. That sort of thing. The Lyrans, though, just use the veneer of German culture to keep the top rungs of society working properly, the international language of trade and diplomacy, so to speak. This has resulted in, somehow, almost by fluke, a society that's extremely peaceful, socially at least. No civil strife of real note, no ethnic clashes like you'd see with the Rosselhog communities within the Combine. The Commonwealth also has a bunch of policies that are extremely left-leaning. While every world is allowed to govern itself how it sees fit with few exceptions, and it's mostly hands-off, the Lyran state guarantees a few inalienable rights to all of its citizens. Access to food and water, education, housing, and jobs. While it's not a monolith, and ghettos, slums, exceptions, and more will exist, the Lyran state is the only one in the Inner Sphere, and I think, if I'm correct, the only one in the entire setting that at least attempts to guarantee a base level of subsistence for everyone in it, regardless of any other factors. The education part is also frankly insane, because while you're not getting a free ride to uni, the Lyran education system is meritocratic with a cutoff. Meaning if you do well, they'll fund your ability to keep doing well and pay for your schooling. If you want, there's even the Pilgrim Professor program, which is essentially a program to get educated professionals to go out and teach all across the Commonwealth. So even if some peasant farming world in the middle of nowhere doesn't have a single school on it and nobody can read, the Lyran state will pay to bring educators at all levels to them to make sure that they meet the same levels as everyone else in their state. All of this together, culturally, socially, economically, has meant that of all the factions, the Lyran Commonwealth provides arguably the single best quality of living, has the highest percentage of educated citizens, and the biggest opportunities and chance to move up in life if you start at the bottom of the ladder. Religiously, they're also confusing and hilarious. And here's another mental flashbang for people who don't know. The majority religion of the ruling class is pretty evenly split between a bastardized version of Protestantism, but then again, what version of Protestantism isn't? Oh, Reformation jokes! Nail another one to the church door, Martin. Let's see what happens this time. And the other half of the religious split is Buddhism, of all things. For some reason. How that came to be, I have no idea, but there you go. The separation of church and state, as well as the freedom of and from religion, are harshly enforced across the entirety of the Lyran Commonwealth, however, so ultimately religion doesn't play a particularly important role in it. In fact, the Lyran Commonwealth outside of Earth itself and a few deep periphery microstates is a bastion of old religion, like the orthodox, almost unchanged versions from like 1,000 years ago on Earth have managed to survive within the Commonwealth all the way to today without being co-opted by the state, like the Mecha Pope has with, the Fed Sons on New Avalon. Though straight up, BattleTech community, please back me up on this. Give the Lyrans Mecha Buddha, a melee atlas wearing one of those big orange toga things, oversized wrist beads with hyper-extending actuators, so instead of firing its guns at you, it runs up and palm strikes you into the next grid coordinate. Is it stupid? Yes. Would it also be hilarious? Yes. Do I want fan art of this sitting on my desk by midnight tonight? Also yes. So, the artists in my community, get to work, chop chop, your lives are on the line, you've been commanded. Onwards. But all in all, getting back on track, the Lyrans have a very, very strange mix of aspects to them that you'd think would never work. But what's the downside? Why do they do all this? It can't be good, can it? BattleTech isn't allowed to be good. And it is and it isn't. The reason the Lyrans provide this stuff isn't some altruistic sense of human rights. They genuinely do not give a shit about your life. The reason they do it is because it's just good business. A stupid population produces less. A population struggling for food and water don't spend on luxuries, products, or invest in the stock market. Homeless people aren't producing for the state and society, and sometimes are a drain because you need police to come and beat them off the doorstep of your banks. Hello, downtown banking district, what are you doing here? And that's what it really boils down to. The Lyrans treat their population like an investment. The more effort you put into that investment, the exponentially better the return is. But what's the downside? Utterly ruthless class-based discrimination, the likes of which you cannot comprehend. Discrimination on all the classics, skin color, ethnicity, religion, they don't really exist in significant amounts. There's a lot of general cross-faction hatred, like Lyrans will hate Draconis Combine citizens and vice versa, but it's not like a classic racism thing. But instead, discrimination based on economic and social standing, oh my god. So think of the way that minimum wage workers are treated today IRL, like generally terribly by terrible people, despite the fact that they don't deserve it. But then imagine that the state promotes a cultural idea and belief that they deserve to be treated like shit because they have failed to be successful. Lyran Culture also promotes vicious competition in all sectors of its economy, though as always happens, one rule for thee and not for me. The big established corps and entities are way too big to fail and have long since calcified the markets, so the rat race is pretty much restricted to the people at the bottom trying to work their way up. Another interesting thing is that unlike most of the other successor states, the Lyrans have a not quite state mandated by law, but very, very heavily pushed recommendation. You can't see it, but I'm giving you like the heaviest quotation marks ever to invest in stocks, securities, but most importantly, government bonds. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, essentially you buy the debt of your state, and then your state agrees to pay you back later. So imagine like you buy $100 of Lyran Commonwealth debt, and then they pay you back 110 a decade later, or something like that. And with a lot of the Lyran Commonwealth's culture discussed, the only other aspects of it that I could really talk about would be stuff like their social generals, or how their archons and their government work, but I think I'm going to leave that specifically to a segment on them, because oh my god, the problem of social generals. The incompetence is staggering. Like, the average Lyran general is proof that God exists, because these people can survive without a brain. I swear to God, that's how dumb they are. But instead, let's talk about their history and do some more dry lore before moving back onto that funny stuff. Like most of the other factions in the Inner Sphere, the Lyrans came into existence as a defensive pact first and foremost, because the Draconis Combine are the villains of the setting. Formed in 2341, the Lyran Commonwealth was made up of three main mercantile and industrial powers: the Tamar Pact, the Federation of Sky, and the Protectorate of Donegal. Initially, they were supposed to be ruled by one Archon per faction, incorporating more as new polities joined the Commonwealth or came into being as they expanded, but that sounds a bit like a purple hell in the making. And they agreed, so it didn't last, since just like the Free Worlds League, the bickering and squabbling led to a civil war pretty fast. Not a truly destructive one, more like hey, all my political rivals got caught in a car bombing while I was mysteriously out to lunch early that day. Weird how things like that just happen, huh? This started the reign of a single Archon, the ruler of the Lyran Commonwealth. And then the Fire Nation attacked. Starting in 2407, the first of many many wars between the Commonwealth and the Combine began. Being an alliance made up primarily of mercantile or industrial states, the early conflicts resulted in relatively firm defeats for the young nation, losing so much territory that their capital at the time, Arcturus, was threatened. Coupled with the Archon of the time being killed in battle, this set the stage for the Lyran Commonwealth to move to Tharkad as the first Steiner took the role of Archon, thus setting the groundwork for a future of a Steiner-dominated Lyran Commonwealth that we all know and love. While other factions, like the Combine, had a very interesting early history during the Age of War because they were doing most of the warring, the Lyrans are relatively quiet. They expanded aggressively, though relatively peacefully. This was mostly because the Lyrans were turned inward during the early stages. They rolled double nat 20s when the RNG seed for their planets came up because they have not only the most rich and resource plentiful planets, basically full stop, but they also have a massive number of them. It's like every other world is solid gold, basically. They were heavily focused on exploiting and building up those resources first, defending against the Combine second, and any military engagements and expeditions a far distant third. That, however, changed when the Terran hegemony kicked the proverbial door in and unveiled its new superweapon, the Mackie. The first battle mech was an absolute game changer, and the Lyrans wanted it. One of the research facilities that was producing the Mackie was on the border of the Terran hegemony. Conveniently and inexplicably for such an incredibly important technological R&D center, this place was located on a world that was half owned by the hegemony and half owned by the Commonwealth. So all the Lyrans had to do was jump over the fence and steal some documents, and what do you mean all the agents are dead? Oh, okay, well, they would never expect someone working their way up from the bottom for months, slowly earning their trust, and they're dead too. Okay, let's try the direct approach. Commando raids, steal technical specs, and they got blown up before they even made planetfall. Every one of the great houses was trying to steal this tech for themselves, and just like the Lyrans, they were all failing, but the Lyrans, they were so close. It was right there. The factory that was making the Mackies was literally on the other side of a chain link fence, and they couldn't get in. It took the death of the current reigning Archon, a bunch of tomfoolery politically and militarily, a new Archon organizing a much, much larger raid, which is basically just an invasion at that point, to make any progress at all, and they still only had an incomplete version at the end. It took them 5 years of constantly trying to get anywhere, and when they eventually did, it was like a half-eaten burger and scribbled notes on a fast food napkin. But it was enough. And the Lyrans have the honor of being, outside the hegemony, the first of the major houses to field battle mech technology en masse. I don't think it was like the first for developing new mechs as well. I think it was like the Bellerophon or the Purple Bird. The Fed Sons? I can't remember. I remember the mech. I think the Bellerophon was actually the first new mech ever designed, but I can't be bothered to figure out or remember or Google who actually did it. But yeah, Steiner was the first faction to wield genuinely large-scale force of battle mechs, including their first creation, which was one of the first new battle mechs, the Ymir. And, as is classic for the Steiner meme, yes, they made an assault mech. It was actually pretty good for the time too, arguably better than the Banshee. Piece of trash that it was. And the reason that it's really important to talk about acquiring battle mech technology rather than just powering through it or skipping it, because this is really, really important for the relationship between the Lyrans and the Combine. The Lyrans were on the defensive for decades by this point, almost like 100 years. With access to these new weapon systems and their massive industrial base and wealth, the Lyrans very quickly turned the tide on the Combine and kicked the ever-loving hell out of them. There was a very brief period where the Lyrans would have been the strongest faction in the Inner Sphere conventionally. We're ignoring the hegemony's warship fleet because that's a lot of boats. But from here, the age of war starts to peter out. The great houses calcify into what we know, approximately, and the Terran hegemony begins working to unite humanity under the Star League. Unfortunately, you can, in a twisted way, blame the Lyrans for the fall of the Star League, since, remember, priority 1 and 2, consolidate resources, murder Drax. They let periphery nations grow on their border far more than any of the other great houses. The biggest of these periphery nations that would eat up all the others was the Rimworld's Republic, home of good old fat Genghis Khan. Ruiner of everything good, shitter of fine pants, eater of buffets, and assassin of emperors. A big reason the Rimworld's Republic could even form to begin with, despite being made of rebels, pirates, and extremists at first, was because the Lyrans didn't care. Trade away, man! Money is money, after all. Who cares from whence it came, as long as it's green? Although I don't think it's really fair to blame them alone, since most of the other successor states were way more direct in killing the Star League. Draconis Combine once again proving why they're the villains. And if it seems like I'm glossing over a lot of history here, I'm really kinda not. I'm even gonna gloss over most of the Star League because the Lyrans don't really do anything. There was a brief scare when all the economies of the sphere opened up to one another and the Lyrans nearly exploded because they weren't ready for it. But they fixed that within a couple years and then went on to make all the money in the universe. And that was the status quo. The Fed Sons and the Drax skirmished all that time. The Free Worlds League is just on fire again. The Capellans are backstabbing people, and the Lyrans just went, I shall sit on my mountain of gold and do nothing. And then they did exactly that for 300 years. If we fast forward to the fall of the Star League, however, the Lyrans were obviously gung-ho to throw down, but not exactly in the same way as the others. The Combine was frothing at the mouth like the rabid animals they are. The Fed Sons responded with similar fervor. The Capellans were stabbing people in the back and the front now, sometimes at the same time. The Free Worlds League is still on fire, but the Lyrans, they had arguably the most reasonable stance, essentially saying, look, we want stable borders, we want to keep making as much money as possible, and we want to build a wall and make the Drax pay for it. The Lyrans only really undertook one large-scale offensive action, and that was consolidating the Bolan Thumb. The Germans were sick of the Free Worlds League waving their dongle around and dragging it across their face, so they occupied all the worlds that made it up. Other than that, though, the Lyran front of basically all the succession wars was pretty static, and this stemmed from their war goals and mentality. Throwback to like 10 minutes ago. Number 1 goal, be rich as fuck. Number 2 goal, kill the Drax because it's fun. Far distant third, fine, I guess we'll do some territory acquisitions and we'll consolidate our borders because our generals say we have to. The Commonwealth's objectives were to maintain its position as the most technologically advanced, most wealthy, and most industrious of all the successor states, and they even maintained relatively good relations with the Free Worlds League. Most conflicts between the two being closer to skirmishes or fights across 1 or 2 worlds rather than the outright wars of annihilation fought between the other powers. Other than that, they traded a few worlds with the Purple Bird, lost a few worlds to the Draconis Combine, and despite the fact that the Succession Wars absolutely obliterated much of the Lyran's infrastructure and kicked them back a few rungs on the tech tree, they still managed to weather the storm better than everyone else. Their immense wealth and industry let them bounce back despite the glassing of several worlds, and their widespread and highly effective education system managed to preserve 5 research and development centers across the Commonwealth, as well as rebuild much of their education systems. For anyone wondering, this is actually the real reason that Steiner is memed on for having so many assault mechs. It's not just that they're filthy rich and have tons of industry, it's that unlike the other successor states, the Commonwealth was actually able to maintain the trained professionals and experts needed to repair, run, and build more factories, despite Comstar's best efforts to screw them over. The hallmark event of the Succession Wars, however, was the fact that the Lyrans were the first to reach out and attempt to form a lasting peace. At first, Katrina Steiner sent a general message to all the other house leaders, essentially saying, hey guys, look, it's been great, Really, super fun few centuries, was a hell of a bender, but you know, I've got a really bad headache. I kind of want to go to sleep. How about we don't do the whole War of Total Conquest thing anymore? Let's put a break on that, put some pause on that, you know what I mean? And everybody ignored her proposal to a peace summit, except the Combine. They very publicly and rudely insulted her proposal instead, because they're the villains of the setting. Eventually, they did get one from the Federated Sons. Hans Stavion started talking with her, and they agreed going forward that the heirs of both nations would marry, and then their kids would inherit both the archonship of the Lyran Commonwealth and the seat of the first prince of the Federated Sons. These kids would rule, and thus, at a wedding on Earth, they announced the formation of the Federated Commonwealth Alliance, a new superstate, and the reason that the clans invaded. Okay, one of the biggest reasons that the clans invaded. The clans had a lot of reasons to kick down the door and try to burn the whole house down. This was really just like the final straw that broke the camel's back, because one of the biggest fears of the clans was that they thought the spheroids were somehow going to reform the Star League without them, and that was unacceptable because God King Kerensky decreed that they shall be the Ubermensch or something. The soup can-sized dent in every clanner's head started itching really, really bad, and they just couldn't accept an end to conflict. Again, hyperbolic and hypocritical, but, you know, clanners in a nutshell. Also, to everyone who doesn't like the FedCom Alliance, they are, like, the closest thing to the legitimate Second Star League there is, and it doesn't really matter what you argue, because that's just the truth. Now, you know, hear me out here. Not only did they peacefully unite, they also started their peaceful, unified reign by launching a colossal fuck-off war against everyone in the name of expanding that peace. Why, the spirit of Ian Cameron and the reunification war was practically riding shotgun the entire time. And when you combine the setting's largest military and population with the largest industrial base and economy together, you get a one-sided stomp that even Comstar could only slow down. Once again, very similar to the original Star League. The history of the Lyran Commonwealth from this point on is frankly kind of trash. Like, the clans invade, Lyrans get bodied, and instead of rallying around their new alliance, their warrior king actually leading and winning after Tukiad, and the fact that the FedCom alliance was poised to be the new superpower, everything exploded because, lol, why not? And the following century of shitstorms happened. The Jihad, the Dark Ages, the Republic of the Sphere. God, Republic of the Sphere, why are you so wrong? Why couldn't you just be normal? The Lyran Alliance, the FedCom Civil War, not necessarily in that order, but everything went to shit so fast because the writers just couldn't stay the course with the thing that they had created. FedCom should have lived, the Capellans should have died, the Dracs should have gone through so many sweeping changes they were basically a different faction by the end with the same flag, and the Free Worlds League should have not died, and instead, I don't know, kept being a side character. Maybe form a coalition with the Taurians, Capellan Remnant, and Magistracy as like an alliance or something against FedCom. You could have moved BattleTech away from this multipolar world with like all these different competing powers into a kind of Cold War-esque style thing where you've got like the FedCom Super Alliance, you've got like the rest of the factions allied against it, and then you've got like this sort of kind of maybe neutral clan factions chilling out there. I think that would have been a way cooler place to take the setting than what we ended up getting. Word of Blake can eat my ass and burn in hell. Anyways, I'm losing it. I'm actually going insane. Alternate realities are bleeding through my fractured mind. I'm going insane, and we need to get back on track before they do. So let's talk about the Lyran Commonwealth's military, because this is something I will have no problem explaining in an extremely hyperbolic but entirely accurate way. I'm going to start with the composition and structure of the Lyran military first, since it's honestly the only part that has any substance here. The Lyrans gravitate towards heavier mech formations than any other faction, while the Dracs and Capellans focus on lighter mechs backed up by a few really high effectiveness and high speed heavies and assaults, and the Fed Sons and Free Worlds League gravitates towards all-rounder mediums and heavies. The Lyrans are a steamroller. They're a tsunami of steamrollers. If it was raining and every drop of rain was a steamroller, that still wouldn't be as overpowering as the Lyran force composition. While it isn't exactly accurate to say they only pick the heaviest mechs around, the Lyrans have a proclivity towards mechs that focus more on firepower and armor than anything else, like speed or flexibility. Commandos, Thunderbolts, whatever, and Griffins. All of these mechs are good, solid vehicles, except the awesome. False advertising in its name. But all of them trend towards the extremes of battle mech design. The Commando isn't particularly fast, but it, at least in my opinion, carries a really, really heavy weapons loadout for its tonnage compared to most other light mechs. The Thunderbolt is notoriously a brick shithouse, being slow but beefy and boating an enormous number of weapons, while things like the Zeus and the Awesome are just giant fat slabs meant to walk at the enemy and kill them faster than the enemy can kill you. And that really sums up the Lyran military. Slow and cumbersome, unwieldy as all hell, but built like a brick shithouse, carrying every weapon imaginable and not really caring about what you throw back at it. And it desperately needs to be like this, since any discussion of military strategy or tactics falls apart. In previous videos going over the main factions and stuff, during military segments, we talked a lot about like how they fight, what they do in combat and stuff, but we can't even begin to do that here. We can't do it, because the Lyran leadership is the most incompetent, overbloated mess to ever exist. How do I discuss tactics when the average Lyran general never studied any and just shouts "oorah" at the start of every battle before leaving to go drink himself to death behind the lines? Do I talk about how the Lyrans need the tonnage advantage because they rely on just walking into the enemy and winning face-to-face fights with all the subtlety of a rhino in a china shop? Do I talk about how certain strategies like flanking or encirclements don't really work when the average Lyran force just moves as a giant death blob? Like, what do I say? And to all the Lyran fans that know the deep lore and want to argue, you're wrong. Don't bother, because for every book or story or game where the Lyrans are shown having competent commanders or well thought out strategies, there are 10 more where they're bumbling morons. There's nothing to talk about strategy-wise because it's up to each individual general, and each individual general is a moron. The only thing on a large-scale level I think is even worth talking about is the fact that the Lyrans really have a crouching tiger, hidden dragon thing going on. Since most of their leadership is worthless, most enemies become used to dealing with incompetent foes. Then suddenly a real soldier comes along, a real tactician, and the Lyrans are unstoppable. Anastasius Foch comes to mind, because surprise, the most well-equipped fighting force in the sphere is actually really, really scary when it's properly led. Gotta calm down a bit though. Okay, let's try that again. In all my research, the Lyrans have what I'll call the theoretical way, where their military has strategies, preferred fighting styles, and well set up logistics. Then they have the practical way, where the top-heavy leadership does whatever it wants and every single unit will behave differently because it's up to the whims of some idiot with a higher number of pips on their lapel than IQ points. So briefly we'll go over how they're supposed to fight, then talk about why they rarely ever manage it because of social generals and their bloated leadership. Early military history isn't that important, so we'll skip to what the bread and butter of Lyran military organization was: the combat team. The core of any Lyran combat team was a unit of mechs, most often heavy or assault mechs. Supporting them were 3 other units of equivalent size. So if it was a regiment of mechs, it would be 3 more regiments, 1 artillery, 1 mechanized, 1 armored. The idea behind this was that the heavy and assault mechs would be the frontline combat force. The artillery would support them directly, and the infantry and tanks would move behind and on the flanks of the mech unit, locking down territory and tar-pitting anyone who tried to flank or outmaneuver the heavier center force. To support the combat team, a recon lance was attached as well. Recon lances were structured the same as a combat team. 1 core of a light mech supported by 2 units of aerospace assets and the occasional fast scout vehicle like a hovercraft. The idea was that the recon lance or regiment or whatever size it was would scout out ahead of the main mech force with the aerospace assets once again wide on the flanks and high above, serving as scouting, early warning, and combat air patrol all wrapped up into one. On paper, However, this is incredibly simple compared to a lot of the other Great House strategies, but in Warfare, simple is good, because the more complicated things are, the more points of failure there are. In theory, it would also allow the Lyrans to flexibly direct resources. The ground pounders at the front and in the thickest fighting control the artillery because they call it down where they need it the most. The tanks and infantry secure and hold the territory that the assault wave crushes over, while scouts can call in airstrikes on valuable targets of opportunity, scout out anti-air positions to protect their assets, generally just play a reconnaissance and strike role and be a nuisance in the rear and side lines. It's a good idea, but everything falls apart in practice since this entire battle strategy relies on the guy in charge not fucking with it. And that's the problem. The social general epidemic. To anyone that knows the original Star Trek, this is the trouble with Tribble's situation all over again. Every time you look away, there are hundreds more of the little general hat-wearing shits all over the place, and you swear to God, despite the fact that they keep getting electrocuted doing it, they're still trying to chew through the electrical wires. And while there's a clear distinction here, the Lyrans do have a lot of good, experienced career officers. You know, they're capable of producing the finest of leaders just like any other faction. The problem is that they have a long history of nobles and wealthy elites buying their way into military roles because they're quite literally just bored. They have nothing to do, want to network, and love the idea of flexing their noodle arms and pretending to be a rugged military man to potential non-existent conquests, let's say. What this translates to is military incompetence bordering on treason. A social general in the back lines might countermand another general's shipment of mechs and ammos to their own unit, ignoring the fact that they're starving frontline units of resources and only ever run parade drills. They just really need that new shipment of assault mechs because they look fancy and they would be great on the next parade around the local garrison. A social general might be put in charge of a unit and order them to hold a position under all circumstances, not realizing or caring that that position is the center of a valley that they can't see or shoot out of. A social general might entirely ignore the orders of high command to assault an enemy position, and instead order his entire force to guard him like Mr. President while the other Lyran forces fight an uphill battle. And every time they're shielded from repercussions because of their quote-unquote status. This problem cripples entirely the Lyran's ability to do anything, hence the giant death blob meta that they ended up actually employing. When the Fedcom formed and they merged with the Federated Suns, most of these problems were put on pause since the Fed Suns were really good at war and contributed a lot of expertise and leadership to the Lyrans, at least for a while. Their government structure thankfully actually works though compared to their military. You know, like the military branch of government is infested with social politicians but the civilian sector is actually pretty great. At the very ground level is the Estates General, a council made up of planetary representatives from every world in the Commonwealth. The Estates General manages and runs the day-to-day of the entire Lyran state, from passing budgets to changing tax laws to managing economic development. They handle all the nitty-gritty of running the state so the Archon can focus on wrangling the not-so-short bus full of nobles and military parasites. While the Estates General has historically been toothless, with the Council above them and the Archon above them able to veto anything they want, there have been eras where the Archon's political power was so low they successfully vote of no confidence a few of them out of power, which is insane compared to how locked down most of the other successor states have their power base. The Estates General also has the homeless as representatives, which aren't actually homeless people. It's representatives whose worlds have been conquered from the Commonwealth's officially recognized territory. Their positions held in perpetuity until they can reclaim said worlds. Above the Estates General is the Council. These are people personally appointed by the Archon to advise and manage for them. The Council has veto power over the Estates General, like I said, and are also allowed to propose and present any legislature they want with approval from the Archon. In reality, though, the Council is mostly a political cabinet of powerful nobles and families that can seriously affect the stability and smooth running of the Commonwealth. Think of it like giving the most powerful vassals a direct and personal spot in your court so that they don't stab you in the back. And at the top of the pile is the Archon, de facto ruling monarch of the Lyran Commonwealth. In theory, The Archon is an elected title, technically, and in practice, the vast wealth of House Steiner, the clever politicking early in the nation's history, and the granting of careful, noble titles and wealth to guarantee support, means that House Steiner is functionally the hereditary absolute monarch of the Lyran Commonwealth. The Archon has all the powers of a dictator constrained only by social etiquette. The Archon has total control of the Lyran military, from the highest of Lyran military units to the lowest of planetary garrisons and even militias. The Archon has total control over the Commonwealth's economy, politics, and civilian life. Any laws or reforms don't need to be approved, they can simply be enacted at a whim. And this near total power is checked by almost nothing. What actually constrains the Archon and House Steiner is the fact that they're so integrated into the Commonwealth as a whole that if they start fucking around, it's incredibly easy for their enemies to do damage to them or just assassinate the ruler and replace them with someone else. The Archons essentially play the game of power politics, some better than others, but they play the game to keep everyone happy and themselves comfortably in power. And that brings us pretty much to the end of the video. We've covered everything from the culture of the Lyran Commonwealth to how they work economically, their political systems, their military, their government and stuff. But if you've made it this far, you are clearly the target audience, so why not leave a like, subscribe, comment down below, do all of the things that help the channel out against the algorithm, and ring the bell so that when we release new content, you'll be notified as early as possible. Or if you're feeling more generous, we do have channel memberships where you'll get access to videos a couple days early, you'll get some private Discord channels, and you'll occasionally get exclusive content, whether they be scrapped ideas, whether they be cut content, or whatever in short form for you to enjoy. If, however, you just want to hang out, we do have a Discord full of other fellow turbo nerds that you can chill out in, post memes, talk about sci-fi, and generally just find other like-minded individuals. And with that, the video is pretty much over. I have nothing else to say. This has been going on for just over an hour. Goddamn. And that's that, so goodbye!